The war had been raging for years, and the universe was slowly falling into chaos. Alien fleets swept across the galaxy, conquering planet after planet, leaving destruction in their wake. Earth, once a thriving world, was no longer the place it used to be. Cities lay in ruins, buildings reduced to rubble, and the once bustling streets were empty. The skies were darkened by the alien ships that patrolled the atmosphere, and what remained of humanity had scattered into hiding, clinging to the faint hope that they might survive long enough to fight back. Among the few remaining survivors was Captain Ethan Gray, a soldier who had lost everything. His family, his home, his friends, gone in the blink of an eye. He was no different from the others who had fought and died trying to protect their planet. But Ethan had something that many others didn't: determination. Even though the aliens had destroyed so much, he believed there was still a chance, a small glimmer of hope that could lead humanity to victory. It wasn't much, but it was all he had left. Ethan sat in a dimly lit room, staring at a map of Earth. The alien forces were closing in, their fleets growing larger with each passing day. There had been attempts to fight back, but they had been crushed without mercy. Humanity was outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. The weapons they had developed in the early years of the war were no match for the alien technology. Earth was on the brink of collapse, and most of the surviving humans were preparing for the worst. The room was filled with the sounds of distant explosions, a constant reminder of the war outside. Ethan didn't flinch. He had grown used to the sound of death. It was everywhere. The walls of the room seemed to close in on him as he thought back to the early days of the conflict. How had they allowed it to go so far? How had they allowed Earth to fall to this point? They were supposed to be the strongest, the smartest, the most resilient species in the galaxy. And yet, here they were, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the inevitable end. The humans had tried everything. They had formed alliances with other species, but the alien invaders were too powerful. Their technology was far superior, and their numbers seemed endless. The humans' best weapon, the human spirit, had proven to be insufficient against the overwhelming force that was the alien fleet. Ethan thought about all the soldiers who had given their lives in battle, only to see the enemy rise stronger than ever. They had given everything for a cause they knew might not succeed, but they fought with the hope that one day humanity would rise again. As Ethan gazed at the map, his mind began to wander. He remembered the words of his old mentor, General Marcus Hale, who had told him years ago, "Never lose hope, Captain. Even in the darkest of times, there's always a chance." But Ethan had seen enough to know that hope alone wouldn't win this war. Humanity needed more than hope. They needed a plan, a strategy, something the aliens hadn't prepared for. But what could that be? The door to the room opened, and Lieutenant Sarah Carter stepped inside. She was a seasoned fighter, one of the few people who had managed to survive the early battles. Her face was worn with exhaustion, but her eyes still held that spark of determination. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He simply nodded to her as she approached. "It's getting worse, Ethan," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The alien forces have moved closer to our last stronghold. We don't have much time left." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stared at the map, his mind racing. They were running out of options. The war was almost over, and it seemed like humanity had no chance of winning. But then something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe they didn't have the firepower, the ships, or the advanced technology that the aliens had, but they still had something the aliens couldn't take away: their will to survive. "Is there any news from command?" Ethan asked. Sarah shook her head. "Nothing. They're working on something, but they're not saying what. We're just waiting for orders." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The weight of the situation was crushing, but there was no time for doubt. He had to keep going. The humans couldn't afford to give up. Not yet. He stood up suddenly, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We need to do something. We can't keep waiting for orders. If command has a plan, We need to make our own. He turned to Sarah. Get the rest of the squad together. We're going to find a way to turn the tide, even if we have to do it ourselves. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'll gather them, Captain. But you're right. Time is running out. We need a miracle. Ethan gave her a sharp nod. We don't need a miracle, Sarah. We just need to fight harder. We'll find a way. As Sarah left the room, Ethan stood in the silence, the sound of distant explosions echoing in his ears. The war had taken so much from him, from all of them, but he couldn't allow it to take everything. Not now. He refused to accept defeat. He believed that humanity had the strength to fight back, even if it seemed impossible. But deep down, Ethan knew something else. The humans were going to need more than just willpower to survive. They were going to need a new approach, a way to level the playing field with the alien forces, and that was something they hadn't discovered yet. In the quiet moments that followed, Ethan couldn't help but think back to the beginning of the war. He had been so sure of victory then. The humans had everything they needed to succeed, or so they thought. But in the face of overwhelming odds, they had been forced to adapt. They had learned that survival wasn't just about firepower. It was about adaptability, creativity, and strength of will. But even with all that, it still felt like they were fighting an enemy they couldn't defeat. Ethan turned back to the map, his eyes narrowing. He could feel it deep in his gut. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. There had to be a way for humanity to win this war, to rise above the destruction and chaos. The aliens had underestimated them, and they were about to make the mistake of their lives. In just a few hours, humanity would join the battle, and the alien invaders would learn what it truly meant to face a force they couldn't comprehend. The storm was coming, and humanity was ready to face it head-on. Ethan wasn't sure what the outcome would be, but one thing was certain. They weren't going to go down without a fight. The storm was coming, and it was going to change everything. The silence in the war room was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the monitors that displayed the ongoing chaos outside. Ethan stood by the window, gazing at the darkened sky. It was the same sky that had once been filled with the laughter of children, the voices of friends and family. Now it was filled with the cold, distant hum of alien ships that moved in tight formations, their eerie glow casting shadows over what was left of Earth. The world felt as if it was being smothered by the weight of the invasion. Captain Ethan Gray's mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything. The news from the front lines was grim. Humanity was losing. The few remaining forces were scattered, hiding in underground bunkers, or fighting for their lives in the few remaining cities that hadn't yet been completely destroyed. Each battle, each day, seemed to bring nothing but defeat. And the aliens, they were relentless. Their ships, their weapons, their strategies. Everything was designed for one thing: total annihilation. Ethan ran a hand over his face, trying to push back the weariness that clung to him. His eyes flicked to the holoscreen in front of him, where a map of Earth was displayed. The alien forces had advanced even further, with their fleets now surrounding the last human strongholds. Hope was a distant memory for most. For the people on Earth, the idea of humanity surviving this war was almost laughable. Their invaders were simply too powerful, and humanity was, in their eyes, insignificant. As he stood there, lost in thought, the door to the war room opened with a soft hiss. Lieutenant Sarah Carter stepped in, her expression grim. Ethan turned toward her, forcing a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Sarah had been with him from the start of the war, a loyal and capable officer who had seen more death and destruction than any soldier should. But despite everything they had been through, she still held on to a flicker of hope. "Captain," she began, her voice calm but heavy with worry, "the council is calling a meeting. They've finally come up with something, but they're not telling us what it is yet. They say it's a last-ditch effort." Ethan nodded slowly, taking in the news. The council's last few plans had been nothing more than temporary solutions. They had always acted too late, too cautiously, while the enemy advanced. He wasn't sure he could trust them this time either. But he had to admit, if they had something new, something that could turn the tide, they needed to hear it. "I'll be there," Ethan said, his voice steady. He turned back to the window, his eyes scanning the dark sky once more. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The meeting room was filled with the hushed murmurs of high-ranking officers, military strategists, and political leaders. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew that whatever plan the Council had cooked up, it was humanity's last shot. If this failed, Earth was finished. The alien forces had made that clear from the start. Ethan entered the room and took his place at the table. He could feel the eyes of the others on him, the weight of their expectations pressing down. Sarah sat beside him, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. The room fell silent as the Council leader, General Carla Hayden, stood at the front of the room. Her face was grim, her posture rigid with the burden of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady but laced with exhaustion, "the situation is dire. Our forces are dwindling, and the enemy is closing in. We have no time to waste." She paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of her words to settle in. Ethan could feel the tension in the room growing thicker. He had been to too many meetings like this before, where the leaders spoke of doom and offered no real solutions. But today, something felt different. There was an urgency in the air, an unspoken desperation. "We've come up with a new plan," General Hayden continued. "It's a long shot. It's dangerous. But it's all we have left." She clicked a button on the holoscreen, and a map of the alien fleet appeared. It was massive, its ships scattered across Earth's atmosphere, a constant reminder of their superiority. The plan was simple. They were going to take the fight to the aliens, right to their doorstep. They had one shot at hitting the alien command center, a strike that would cripple their ability to control their forces. But the plan had a catch. Getting to that command center meant going through the heart of the alien fleet, and only a handful of soldiers would survive the journey. A murmur ran through the room as the reality of the situation set in. There was no way to deny it. The chances of success were slim. But there was something else in the air, something that Ethan hadn't felt in a long time, the spark of hope. General Hayden's eyes met his, and she nodded. "Captain Gray, you're the one leading this mission. You and your team are humanity's last hope." Ethan's heart raced. He had led soldiers before, but this was different. This wasn't just a mission. It was a final attempt to save the human race. He glanced around the room at the faces of those who had put everything on the line, who had sacrificed so much already. They had all lost loved ones, seen their cities fall, their world crumbling around them. But despite it all, they were still here. They were still fighting. Ethan turned to Sarah, who was watching him closely. She gave him a small, reassuring nod. He knew what she was thinking. They were all in this together, no matter the odds. "We'll do it," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We'll take the fight to them. And we'll win. We don't have a choice." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 battles. In that moment, Ethan knew that humanity had one last shot at survival. He wasn't sure how they were going to do it, or if they could even make it to the alien command center, but he knew one thing. They weren't going to go down without a fight. As the meeting ended, the tension remained. The plan was set into motion, and the soldiers who had volunteered for the mission began preparing. But as Ethan stood there, watching them, he knew that no matter the outcome, they had already won something more important than any battle. They had found their resolve. The storm was coming, and humanity was ready to face it head-on. The question was no longer if they could survive. It was how far they were willing to go to win. The battle had begun. As dawn broke over the horizon, the first wave of human forces emerged from their last remaining stronghold, a military base nestled deep in the mountains. The once peaceful landscape had now been scared by the war, with debris from destroyed buildings and abandoned vehicles scattered across the barren terrain. The air was thick with tension, the heavy hum of alien ships above acting as a constant reminder of the overwhelming force humanity was about to face. But today, it was different. Today, they weren't hiding or running. Today, humanity was fighting back. Captain Ethan Gray stood at the front of his platoon, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The alien fleet was visible in the sky, dozens of massive ships hovering ominously above, their dark shapes blocking out the sun. The sheer scale of the invasion was enough to make any soldier feel insignificant, but not Ethan. He had seen worse. He had felt hopelessness before, but that was before today. Today, humanity wasn't just going to survive. They were going to fight back. Ethan took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his weapon. His team was ready. They had trained for this moment. And now, it had arrived. He turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Sarah Carter, who was standing beside him, her face grim but resolute. "You ready?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. Sarah nodded, her jaw set in determination. "Let's do this." Ethan turned his attention back to the battlefield. The plan was simple. They would move in quickly, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They had only one shot to infiltrate the heart of the alien fleet and disable the command center. But the challenge was immense. The alien forces were powerful, and their technology far outmatched anything humanity had. The risk of failure was high, and the cost of failure would be the end of everything they had left. The first volley of fire came as the human forces advanced. Alien drones swooped down, their weapons firing in rapid succession, cutting through the air like deadly missiles. The ground shook as explosions rocked the landscape, sending plumes of smoke and dust into the air. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he gave the signal to move forward. The soldiers, equipped with the best remaining tech humanity had, darted forward, using the craters and wreckage as cover. Each step felt like it could be their last, but they pressed on, determination in their eyes. Ethan's mind raced as he calculated their every move, his instincts sharp from years of combat experience. The alien drones were relentless, but the humans had something they didn't: resilience. "Keep moving," Ethan barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to get to that command center. Now." They pushed forward, staying low, but the aliens were relentless. The air was filled with blinding flashes of light, and the ground was constantly shaking from the force of explosions. Ethan could feel the heat from the blasts against his face, but he kept moving. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when so many lives depended on their success. A sudden explosion sent a soldier flying into the air, their body tossed aside like a ragdoll. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he saw the young man's lifeless form hit the ground. His team didn't flinch, though. They kept moving, each of them knowing that this battle wasn't just for their survival, it was for the future of all mankind. The human forces were now deep within the alien territory. The command center was close. Ethan could see the towering structure in the distance, surrounded by alien defenses. But getting there would be no easy task. The alien forces were aware of their presence now, and they were pulling out all the stops to stop them. The soldiers had to move quickly before they were surrounded. Ethan reached for his comm device and activated it. "Command, this is Captain Gray. We're approaching the command center. Requesting air support to neutralize enemy defenses. Over." There was a crackle on the other end of the line. "Roger that, Captain. Air support is en route. ETA 2 minutes." Ethan glanced at his watch, counting down the seconds. 2 minutes wasn't much time, but it was all they had. He motioned for Sarah and the rest of his team to follow him as they closed the gap between them and the command center. Then the ground shook again. This time, it was different. The sound was deafening, a low rumble that made the very earth beneath them tremble. Ethan's eyes widened as a massive alien warship descended from the clouds above, its hull gleaming with deadly energy. "They're here," Ethan muttered under his breath. The alien ship was massive, far larger than any human vessel. Its weapon systems lit up as it began targeting their position, and Ethan knew that without air support, they wouldn't survive long. But before he could react, the first of the human fighter jets appeared, slicing through the sky at breakneck speed. The jets unleashed a volley of missiles at the alien warship, and the sky erupted in a series of explosions. The alien ship staggered, its shields flickering under the assault. "Air support is on target," Sarah shouted over the comms, her voice filled with relief. "Keep pushing forward. We're almost there." Ethan nodded, his pulse quickening as he saw the alien defenses beginning to falter. The humans were making progress. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were gaining ground. The final push was ahead. They were close, so close to the command center. The alien forces were regrouping, but they weren't fast enough. The human team advanced with renewed energy, their weapons blazing, cutting through the remaining alien drones with precision. The command center was within reach. But just as they approached the final stretch, the alien forces launched their last desperate counterattack. The ground erupted with blasts, and alien soldiers, heavily armored and vicious, emerged from the shadows, charging toward the humans. It was a fight to the death, and Ethan knew that this would be the deciding moment. They had come too far to turn back now. "Fall back to cover," Ethan yelled, as the alien soldiers closed in. The humans fought back with everything they had, their rifles spitting bullets as they tried to hold off the alien onslaught. Each shot, each strike, brought them closer to their goal, but it was a battle of attrition. The aliens were relentless, and they were beginning to surround the human forces. Just as it seemed like they might be overrun, the sky exploded with a bright flash. A missile from one of the fighter jets collided with the command center, tearing a hole in its defenses. The massive structure began to crumble, and the alien forces faltered, their command center breached. "Now," Ethan shouted, as the human forces rushed toward the crumbling structure. They were close, so close. In a final act of desperation, Ethan led his team into the heart of the command center, bypassing the remaining alien defenders. The alien command center was a labyrinth of corridors, but Ethan and his team moved swiftly, their eyes focused on one goal, the heart of the alien war machine. And then, with one final push, they reached it. The alien control hub, the source of their command structure, lay before them. With a single command, they could bring the whole operation to a halt. Ethan didn't hesitate. He gave the order. The control hub was destroyed, and the alien command structure collapsed. The alien forces were no longer coordinated, and the war, against all odds, was over. But even as the dust settled and the remaining alien forces retreated, Ethan knew one thing: humanity had won. Against all odds, they had won. And in just 5 hours, they had turned the tide of a war that had seemed lost. It wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. The storm had passed, and now the humans were ready to rebuild. "You said." The battlefield was silent now, save for the distant hum of retreating alien ships. The once overwhelming might of the invaders had crumbled under the relentless will of humanity. The alien forces, though technologically superior, had failed to anticipate the sheer determination that drove the human spirit. Captain Ethan Gray stood amidst the ruins of the alien command center, breathing heavily, his body bruised and bloody from the chaos of the battle. His squad had fought bravely, each soldier pushing past their limits to ensure the success of the mission. Yet, despite the victory, there was no time to celebrate. The war wasn't over. This was just one victory in a series of countless battles that would determine the fate of Earth. Ethan glanced at his team, each of them sharing the same look of exhaustion and disbelief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had destroyed the alien command hub. The carefully coordinated assault had crippled their enemy's ability to communicate, and with it, their ability to organize and execute their military strategy. The once indomitable alien fleet was now fractured, its cohesion shattered by the destruction of its leadership. Sarah Carter, Lieutenant and Ethan's most trusted officer, approached him, wiping the dirt and sweat from her brow. Her face was grim, but there was a flicker of something like hope. "We did it, Captain," she said quietly, her voice carrying both relief and disbelief. "But there's still so much more to do." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the wreckage around them. The alien command center was burning, smoke rising into the air like a dark omen. The ground was littered with debris, destroyed ships, broken weapons, the bodies of fallen soldiers. It was a brutal reminder of the cost of victory. "We've taken the first step," Ethan said, his voice low. "But we can't stop here. We need to finish what we started. We need to push them back, once and for all." His words weren't just for Sarah or his squad. They were a rallying cry. Humanity had shown that they could stand up to the invaders. But defeating them, truly defeating them, would require everything they had left. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life. "Captain Gray, this is Commander Richards. We got movement from the remaining alien forces. They're not retreating. They're regrouping. They've still got ships in orbit, and we're detecting massive reinforcements coming from their mothership." Ethan's heart sank. The victory here had been monumental, but it was not a decisive one. The aliens weren't giving up. They were simply regrouping, preparing for another round of battle. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like never before. "We need to act quickly," Ethan said, turning to Sarah. "We can't let them reorganize. If they manage to consolidate their forces, this victory will be meaningless. We have to strike before they can build up any momentum." Sarah nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. "What's the plan?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "We move fast. We take whatever ships we can find and hit them hard. If we catch them while they're still reeling, we can break their resolve. We got one chance to take them down." No hesitation. The rest of the team assembled quickly, each soldier ready to face whatever challenge came next. The world around them had changed in a matter of hours. The alien forces, once so confident in their power, were now reeling from the blow humanity had struck. But Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. The true test lay ahead. As they moved through the wreckage toward the remnants of the alien ships that had fallen during the battle, the sense of urgency grew. The humans had a brief window of "You said," and immediately began preparations. The cockpit was cramped, the air thick with tension, but there was no time for hesitation. Ethan buckled himself into the pilot's seat, his hands moving with precision, his mind focused on the task ahead. Sarah took the co-pilot's seat, and the rest of the team strapped in, their eyes darting between the instruments and the wreckage outside. "We're going in full speed," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count." The engines roared to life, and the ship's thrusters kicked in. It wasn't much, an old human fighter, cobbled together from the remnants of earlier battles. But it was enough. As they lifted off, the sight of the burning alien command center below them filled Ethan with a grim sense of pride. The humans had broken through. Now they had to finish it. The sky above was filled with the remnants of the alien fleet, their massive warships still hovering menacingly in the atmosphere. The alien ships were recovering, repositioning themselves, but they were still vulnerable. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted. The humans had a small window in which they could strike a decisive blow. Ethan's hand gripped the controls tightly as he flew the fighter into the heart of the alien fleet. The comms buzzed with chatter from the other human ships, coordinating their movements, but there was no time to waste. The alien fleet was slowly beginning to regroup, and once they realized how badly their command structure had been fractured, they would fight back with everything they had. "Stay close," Ethan ordered. "We hit them fast, hit them hard, and don't give them a chance to recover." As the human ships closed in, Ethan could see the alien vessels repositioning. Their weapon systems came online, their shields flickering into view, ready to retaliate. But they were still disoriented, still trying to adapt to the sudden chaos that had unfolded when the command center had fallen. The human fleet had the advantage for now. A sudden flash of light from the alien warship's weapon systems shot toward them, narrowly missing their fighter. The battle had begun in earnest. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and he dove sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy blasts. The alien ships weren't giving them an easy ride. They had regrouped quickly, and now they were fighting back ferociously. The skies above were a blur of motion as human and alien ships wove in and out of the chaotic dogfights. Ethan could hear the roar of missiles being launched from the human ships, their trails of fire cutting through the sky as they found their marks on the alien fleet. But for every alien ship that was destroyed, another seemed to take its place, as though their reinforcements were endless. "We can't let them reassemble," Sarah shouted over the comms, her voice sharp with urgency. "We need to find their mothership. If we can take that down, we can cripple the entire fleet." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. His eyes scanned the skies, looking for the massive alien mothership that had been hovering just outside of Earth's atmosphere. The mothership had to be the key to ending this. If they could destroy it, the entire invasion would lose its command structure, and the remaining alien forces would scatter in confusion. "There it is," Ethan shouted, pointing toward the massive warship that loomed above them. It was a massive structure, far larger than anything the humans had, but Ethan had seen the damage that had been done to their command center. If they could hit the mothership with everything they had, they could end this. "On my mark," he said, taking a deep breath. "We go straight for it. All weapons, full power." The team locked on their targets, the adrenaline pumping through their veins as they closed in on the mothership. Ethan's heart raced, knowing this was the moment that would determine everything. If they succeeded, humanity would stand victorious. If they failed, they might never get another chance. "Mark," Ethan shouted, and the team fired in unison. The sky lit up with explosions as missiles and energy blasts surged toward the mothership. It took everything they had. The alien mothership's shields flared brightly, absorbing the first wave of hits, but the barrage kept coming, relentless and unyielding. The massive ship began to shudder as its shields weakened, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat when he saw the first crack in the alien vessel's hull. "Direct hit," Sarah yelled. "We're getting through." The mothership began to break apart, its massive form cracking and splitting as the weapons continued to rain down on it. The alien fleet's cohesion was collapsing. With each passing second, the humans were making history. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of the planet. But just as they thought the victory was within their grasp, the mothership's core lit up with a blinding light. It was an energy surge, one last desperate attempt to take them down. The alien vessel's final weapon was charging, its immense power gathering in the heart of the ship. "Pull back. Get clear," Ethan shouted. But it was too late. The energy burst released with an ear-splitting roar, and Ethan could feel the shockwave even from miles away. His ship was thrown off course, spiraling into a violent tumble. Alarms blared, and the control panels flickered, but somehow, the ship held together. Ethan fought to regain control, his hands moving frantically over the console. "Everyone, report in," he called, voice tight with urgency. Sarah's voice came through the comms, shaky but clear. "We're still here. Damage, but we're good to go." The rest of the team confirmed the same, though it was clear they were all shaken from the blast. The alien mothership was a burning husk in the sky, its core destroyed in the final explosion. The alien fleet was now a shattered, disorganized mass, their coordination completely lost. Their war for Earth was over. Ethan looked around at his team. They were battered, their ships damaged, but they had done it. They had struck the final blow. The remaining alien forces, their leadership gone and their fleet in ruins, began to retreat, scattered and leaderless. "It's over," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with awe. "We did it." Ethan couldn't help but smile. despite the exhaustion that weighed on him. The fight had been brutal, and many had fallen, but humanity had proven something today, something that would echo through history. They had fought back, against all odds, and in just 5 hours they had won. The skies above Earth were quiet once more as the remnants of the alien fleet disappeared into the void. The battle for Earth was over. Humanity had prevailed. The dust was beginning to settle, but the weight of victory was heavier than any burden Ethan had ever carried. The sky above, once a battlefield of explosive flashes and frantic movements, was now eerily calm. There was no sign of the alien fleet, just the emptiness of space, as though the war had never existed. Yet Ethan knew better. The battle might have been won, but the scars of war would be with humanity for a long time. Inside the cockpit of his fighter, Ethan took a deep breath. The comms were silent now, save for a few scattered messages from the other surviving ships, but there was no real need for conversation. He knew what everyone was feeling: exhaustion, relief, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had stood its ground and claimed victory in a battle that had seemed impossible just hours before. Sarah's voice crackled through the comms, breaking the silence. "Captain, what now?" Ethan sat back in his seat, his mind running through the possibilities. They had dealt the aliens a massive blow, but the war wasn't over. Not entirely. The aliens would retreat, regroup, and they would come back stronger, angrier, and with reinforcements. It was only a matter of time before they made another attempt to invade. But that was a problem for another day. "For now," Ethan said, his voice calm despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his head, "we rebuild." "Rebuild?" Sarah echoed, surprised. "You're not thinking of just calling it quits, are you?" Ethan smiled slightly, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "No, I'm thinking we've just proven something to ourselves. We're not just survivors anymore. We're fighters. And if the aliens come back, we'll be ready." Sarah was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with quiet admiration. "You're right, Captain. We're not just surviving. We're fighting for something bigger." Ethan's eyes turned toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise. The faint light cut through the atmosphere, casting long shadows over the battlefield below. It was the dawn of a new era. The Earth might have been ravaged by war, but humanity had survived. They had won, and that victory meant something far greater than just saving the planet. It meant they had shown the universe that no matter how overwhelming the odds, humanity would never bow down. The fight had been brutal, but in those 5 short hours, humanity had come together in a way they never had before. They had pushed past fear and doubt, unified by the single goal of survival. Now they had the chance to rebuild, to rise from the ashes of a war they had almost lost, and to prepare for whatever came next. Ethan's voice was steady as he turned his attention back to the task at hand. "Let's get back to base. We've got a lot of work to do." With that, he gently pushed the throttle forward, and the ship began to ascend, cutting through the atmosphere as they headed back toward the human stronghold. The other surviving ships followed closely behind, forming a tight formation as they made their way back home. The journey was long, but there was no sense of dread, only determination. Ethan knew the fight for humanity's future wasn't over yet, but they had won a critical battle. They had proven that even when faced with insurmountable odds, humanity could rise up and fight back. As they neared the base, the familiar lights of the landing pads below flickered into view. The soldiers in the hangars, who had watched the battle unfold from the ground, began to cheer. The Earth had survived. It had been saved, and they had fought not just for themselves, but for future generations. Ethan guided the fighter down, the ship's landing gear touching the ground with a soft thud. The other ships followed suit, each one slowly coming to rest. The doors opened, and the soldiers filed out, their faces drawn with exhaustion, but lit with the fire of triumph. As Ethan stepped out of the cockpit, he was greeted by Commander Richards, the leader of the human resistance forces. Richards was a tall man, his face worn with years of leadership and battle, but today his eyes were alight with something different. Hope. "We did it," Richards said, his voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." Ethan nodded, his gaze sweeping over the survivors. Soldiers, engineers, scientists, and civilians, all of whom had fought in different ways to ensure this victory. "We did it," he said softly. "But this is only the beginning." Richards raised an eyebrow. "You don't think they'll be back, do you?" Ethan's gaze turned toward the sky, his mind already racing ahead to the future. "I'm sure of it. But this time, we're ready." The two men stood there for a moment, watching the sun rise higher, casting a new light over the remnants of the battlefield. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like it belonged to humanity. They had fought, and they had won. In just 5 hours, the tide of the war had turned. And now, the real work began. The work of rebuilding. The work of ensuring that this victory was not just a fleeting moment of triumph, but the first step in a long journey of survival and strength. Ethan turned back to face his team, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Let's get to work." As they began to move toward the base, the sounds of celebration filled the air, but there was also a sense of determination. Humanity had faced the ultimate test and had emerged victorious. Now they would face whatever came next with the same resilience that had brought them through the war. And as long as they kept fighting, there would always be hope for the future. For the first time in a long time, Ethan believed it too. The war was over and humanity had won. And with each passing day, they would prove to the universe that Earth was not a place to conquer. It was a place to be reckoned with. The base was alive with the buzz of activity as the survivors of the battle began their long-awaited return. Soldiers moved swiftly across the landing fields, unloading cargo, securing equipment, and tending to the wounded. There was a palpable sense of unity in the air, something that hadn't been felt in years. The alien invasion had threatened to tear them apart, but now, with the war temporarily over, humanity had come together in a way they never had before. Ethan walked through the base with a heavy heart, but a clear mind. The weight of the victory was still settling in, but he knew the true challenge lay ahead. The war was over, yes, but the future of Earth had yet to be decided. The alien forces might have been scattered, their command structure obliterated, but they would not stay down for long. They had regrouped before and would do so again. The question was, would humanity be ready? Sarah caught up with him as he walked toward the command center. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but filled with a touch of concern. "What's next?" Ethan didn't slow his pace as he entered the large structure, the central hub of the human resistance. The room was bustling with activity, just like the rest of the base. Officers, strategists, and engineers were all working furiously to process the results of the battle, analyze what had worked, and what needed improvement. Despite the brief moments of victory, there was no room for complacency here. "Next," Ethan echoed, pausing in front of a holographic map of Earth. "We prepare for the next phase of the war. We don't get to relax just because we took down one mothership." "Do you really think they'll come back that quickly?" Sarah asked, eyeing the map with concern. The alien ships had been decimated, their leadership wiped out, but there were still pockets of resistance out there. Alien forces that had flooded Earth's atmosphere, no doubt regrouping elsewhere in the galaxy. Ethan let out a long breath, his eyes fixed on the map. "It's not about how fast they come back. It's about what we do while we wait for them. We need to rebuild our defenses, sharpen our strategies, and prepare for the inevitable. We can't afford to wait until they're knocking on our door again." "But the enemy is scattered," Sarah argued. "Their fleet is shattered. There's a real chance we've dealt them a crippling blow. Maybe they won't be able to regroup for a long time." Ethan nodded, but his expression remained grim. "Maybe. But we can't gamble on hope. We've learned the hard way that underestimating them would be a mistake. We need to be ready for anything. We need to make sure this victory means something." He turned to face her, his eyes steady. Humanity's response to this war will determine our future. If we let down our guard, if we think we can just go back to the way things were, we're going to fail. The aliens might have underestimated us before, but we can't make the same mistake. We must rebuild, strengthen our defenses, and adapt. Because if they come back, we won't be caught off guard again. Sarah didn't argue. She had seen the way Ethan operated, methodical, cautious, but always thinking several steps ahead. If anyone could guide humanity through the aftermath of this war, it was him. He had a way of inspiring those around him, of turning the impossible into something achievable. He didn't see a broken world in front of him. He saw a future waiting to be forged. We'll need more than just our military forces, Sarah said, her mind racing with possibilities. We'll need scientists, engineers, everyone working together. We can't afford to be fragmented. I know, Ethan replied, turning back to the holographic map. That's why we need to start rebuilding now, before it's too late. We'll need to gather the brightest minds from every corner of Earth. We can't afford to be a divided planet if we want to win this war in the long run. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Do you think people will listen to that? After everything we've been through? Ethan's eyes darkened as he thought about the cost of the war, the lives lost, the cities destroyed, the families torn apart. We have no choice. We've seen what happens when we're divided, when we fight amongst ourselves. The aliens didn't come to Earth because they wanted to take over our land. They came because they saw us as weak, fractured. But now we've proven something. We've proven that we can unite, that we can fight together. Sarah met his gaze. And if they come back, stronger than ever, we'll be ready. The words left Ethan's mouth with conviction. There was no other option. We'll make sure of it. As the conversation ended, the base fell into a brief period of quiet reflection. The soldiers, the survivors, they all had a moment to process the battle they had just fought. But there was no time to linger on victory. Ethan knew that the next phase was about survival and preparation. The human race had taken its first step toward reclaiming its place on Earth, but it was only a first step. What came next would require every ounce of strength, ingenuity, and unity humanity had left. Back in the command center, the team was hard at work, updating their strategies and compiling data from the wreckage of the alien ships. Every scrap of technology, every piece of alien intel, was being analyzed for ways to improve their weapons, their tactics, and their understanding of their enemy. Ethan watched from the sidelines, letting his mind focus on the bigger picture. He saw the broken pieces of the world, the cities still smoldering, the lands scarred by battle. But he also saw something else, a future. The future of a united, resilient humanity that had just proven it could stand up to the greatest threat Earth had ever faced. But even as he began to think about the road ahead, he knew the war wasn't truly over. The aliens would regroup. They would come back, perhaps stronger than ever, and humanity would have to be ready to face them again. As he stood at the heart of the command center, he glanced around at the people working beside him. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the future of humanity. They had made it this far. Now, they had to make sure it counted. Prepare for the next phase, he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. The real war is just beginning.